My name is Nora Voss, and I am 34 years old. And I want to tell you about the afternoon my parents called me into their living room and told me that my grandmother's inheritance was going to my brother. They sat across from me on the sofa they have owned since I was 9 years old. My father had his hands flat on his knees, the way he holds them when he has prepared what he is going to say and does not want to be interrupted before he finishes saying it. My mother had a glass of water on the side table that she did not drink from once during the entire conversation. They had the posture of people who had rehearsed something and were relieved to finally be delivering it. My father spoke first. He said that my grandmother had left a general estate and that he and my mother, as co-executors, had reviewed everything carefully and made a decision about what was fair. He used the word fair 3 times in the first 4 sentences. I noticed that. I have learned over a long time to notice when a person uses the same word more than once in a short space, because it usually means the word is doing work that the facts cannot do on their own. When someone says fair once, they are describing a situation. When they say it 3 times, they are trying to convince someone. I was not sure whether they were trying to convince me or themselves. My brother, Daniel, is 37. He's 3 years older than me, and he has made a series of financial decisions over the past decade that have not resolved themselves into stability. He has started businesses that did not survive their second year. He has borrowed money from my parents on multiple occasions with the understanding, as far as I could tell, that repayment was optional. My parents had treated his instability as a condition requiring ongoing maintenance, and my own stability as evidence that I needed nothing and deserved nothing extra. I had a job I had built carefully over 8 years. I had an apartment I owned. I had savings I had accumulated through choices my parents had never commented on, because competence in my family did not attract attention. It attracted assumptions. The assumption that I was fine. The assumption that fine meant I could absorb whatever was redirected away from me. I sat in the living room and I listened to my father explain that Daniel needed a foundation and that I had already built mine, and that my grandmother would have understood. I asked one question when he finished. I asked whether they had read the full original estate document or only the summary the solicitor had prepared as a convenience document. My father looked at my mother. That look was its own answer, and I understood it before either of them spoke again. I said I would like to see the original document. My mother said there was no need. I said I would like to see it anyway. Please hit like and subscribe and drop your city in the comments before I continue. I want to know where you are watching from. My grandmother's name was Helen Voss, and she died 18 months ago at 81. She had been an accountant for 30 years, and she had a specific and disciplined relationship with documentation that I had always respected, and that I think my parents had never fully understood, because they were people who trusted summaries, and my grandmother was a person who trusted the original source. She kept copies of everything in a filing system that was organized by year and category, and that she had maintained from the time she was 30 years old. She dated everything. She wrote in the margins of important papers in her small, careful handwriting, and those margin notes were not incidental. They were part of the record. She had told me once, sitting at her kitchen table when I was 22 and visiting for a long weekend, that she had made arrangements and that I should not worry. I had not asked what she meant. She had not elaborated. We had moved on to talking about other things, and I had filed the sentence in the back of my mind without returning to it. After my parents told me the inheritance was going to Daniel, I called the solicitor's office the following morning. I did not tell my parents I was calling. I identified myself, explained that I was a named party in the estate, and asked to see the original document in full, not the summary. The solicitor said she could send a copy. It arrived the following afternoon as a scanned PDF, 41 pages. My parents had been working from a 4-page summary the office had prepared as a convenience. The full original document had been drafted by my grandmother 11 years earlier with a different solicitor and then refiled. My parents did not know it had been refiled because they had not asked whether it had been refiled. The summary had been prepared from an earlier version, before the refile, and the solicitor's office had sent it as a standard starting point without flagging that a revised original existed. This is how important things get missed, not through malice, through the assumption that the summary is sufficient and that reading the full thing is unnecessary work. I read all 41 pages at my kitchen table in one sitting with a cup of tea that went cold before I reached page 10. My grandmother wrote the document in the same plain language she used for everything. There were no sections that required a legal dictionary. There were no ambiguous clauses. There was one clause in particular, on page 23, that was among the clearest things I have ever read in a formal document. It was also the clause my parents had never seen, because they had stopped at page 4. The clause was not hidden. It was not buried in technical language or tucked into a footnote. It was clearly headed, clearly paragraphed, and written in the direct, plain style my grandmother used for everything she considered important enough to put into a document. The clause specified that the liquid assets of the estate, meaning the savings accounts and the investment portfolio, were to be distributed in equal shares to her surviving grandchildren unless a grandchild had received a direct financial gift from the estate executor or facilitated by the estate executor within the 3 years preceding the distribution date. In that case, the clause said, the amount of the gift was to be deducted from that grandchild's share before equal division occurred. My brother Daniel had received a significant financial gift 3 years and 2 months before the distribution date. He had received it from my grandmother directly, as a bank transfer, documented in her records with the date, the amount, and a handwritten note in her filing system describing the nature and purpose of the transfer. The gift had originated from my grandmother's savings. My parents had requested it on Daniel's behalf when he had been in a particularly difficult financial position. My grandmother had agreed to the request because she did not want to refuse outright and because she loved Daniel in the uncomplicated way she loved all of her grandchildren. But she had done something my parents had not known she would do. Within the same month she made the transfer, she had contacted her solicitor and added the clause. She had done it quietly, without telling my parents, without telling Daniel, and without telling me. She had simply adjusted the document to reflect the full picture of what had moved and what remained. When I calculated the numbers, applying the clause as written, the deduction brought Daniel's share below mine by a meaningful margin, not a small one. The net effect was that under the actual terms of the actual document that had been refiled and that was legally binding, I was entitled to more than my parents had allocated, and Daniel was entitled to less. I sat with this information for 48 hours before I decided what to do with it. I did not spend those hours feeling victorious. I spent them thinking about my grandmother, about the precision of what she had done, about the care it had taken to add a clause quietly and correctly and in a way that would stand up if someone eventually read the full thing. She had known someone eventually would. I think she had known it would be me. On the third morning, I called the solicitor. I explained what I had found on page 23. I walked her through the clause, the gift to Daniel, the timing, and the calculation. She pulled the refiled document while I was on the phone. She reviewed it and confirmed that my reading was correct, and that an error in the distribution basis had been an error on the part of the office, and that she would need to contact my parents as co-executors to explain the discrepancy and revise the distribution accordingly. She said this was standard procedure when an error in the distribution basis was identified and confirmed. I said I understood and that she should proceed however she needed to. I did not call my parents before the solicitor did. I did not warn them or prepare them for what they were about to hear. I did not think it was my responsibility to cushion the delivery of information that had been available to them the entire time if they had chosen to read the document they were legally responsible for executing. My mother called me the evening after the solicitor contacted them. Her voice had the quality it gets when something has happened that she had not arranged and has not yet decided how to position. She said, "Nora, we did not know about the clause." I said, "I know." She said, "We were trying to do what was right for the family." I said, "I understand that." She said, "Why did you not come to us first with what you found?" I want to address that question because it is the question I had expected and because the answer matters. I did not go to my parents first because, in my experience, when you bring corrective information to the people who made the error, the first conversation becomes about their feelings about the error. It becomes about intentions and fairness and what Daniel needs and whether I'm being difficult. I had one piece of information, which was what the document actually said. Taking it to the solicitor meant the document was read correctly by someone with authority to act on it. I had not wanted a conversation about feelings. I had wanted the document executed as written. My father got on the line and said that he and his mother felt I had gone around them. I said, "Dad, I contacted the solicitor for a copy of a document I was entitled to see as a named party. Then I reported a discrepancy to the same solicitor. I said that is the correct process. I did not go around anyone." He said they would need time to review everything. I said, "Take the time you need." The estate was redistributed according to the original document 4 months after the initial distribution had been made. There was no courtroom, there was no formal dispute. There were emails between solicitors, a revised distribution schedule, a correction letter, and 2 transfers into my account on a Tuesday afternoon in November when the light was low and flat and the day was otherwise unremarkable. Daniel called me once during those 4 months. He called on a Sunday, and his voice had the quality of someone who has had something they had already mentally spent taken back and has not finished processing the loss of it. He said, "I cannot believe you did this." I said, "Daniel, I read the document our grandmother wrote." He said, "You knew about the clause before you found it." I said, "I found the clause when I read the full document for the first time. That is different from knowing it was there." He said, "She always favored you." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about my grandmother, who had agreed to give Daniel money when he needed it, who had then quietly ensured the gift was accounted for in the distribution, who had told me at 22 not to worry and had meant it across a distance of 11 years. I said, "Daniel, she made sure you had support when you asked for it, and she made sure the rest of the estate was distributed accurately. I do not think that is favoritism. I think that is accounting." He did not respond to that, and the conversation ended shortly after. My parents and I have spoken a number of times since. The conversations are shorter than they used to be and more careful, which is its own kind of honesty. My mother asked me once whether I felt guilty. I told her I did not. I told her I had read a document and reported what it said. She said, "It was never about the money for us. It was about Daniel." I said, "For Grandma, it was about accuracy. She had made a gift, and she had recorded it, and she had trusted that someone would eventually read past the summary." She sat with that. She did not respond to it directly. I did not press her. I had said what was true and what was useful, and I did not need her to confirm it back to me. The month after the redistribution, I drove to my grandmother's house, which had been sold as part of the estate's settlement, and I sat in a car outside for a few minutes before driving home. I am not sure exactly what I was doing there. I think I was acknowledging something. The fact that she had planned for it, that she had written it down, that she had trusted that accuracy would eventually surface if someone was willing to go looking for it. I was the one who went looking. She had known I would be. That is the whole of it. Drop your city in the comments, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.